Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this village board meeting to order on Monday, January 7, 2019, and ask that you all please rise and join the village board in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Baldino.
Here.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Here.
Trustee Blackwood.
Here.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Here.
Trustee LaBedz.
Here.
Trustee Sidor.
Here.
Trustee Scaletta.
Here.
President Hayes.
Here. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes, and we have two sets to approve tonight. First is from the Committee of the Whole meeting from August 13, 2018. Is that right?
Yes,
August?
that's correct.
Okay. And are there any changes or passes?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve by Trustee Blackwood, seconded by Trustee LaBedz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next are the village board meeting minutes from December 17, 2018. Any changes or passes?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve by Trustee Blackwood, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next, we move on to the approval of the accounts payable, and I call on Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd move approval of the warrant register with a check date of December 30th, 2018 in the amount of $2,143,830.60.
Second. Motion to approve by Trustee Rosenberg, seconded by Trustee Scaletta. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Scaletta.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
Trustee Tinaglia. Yes. Trustee Baldino.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
Trustee LaBedz.
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes. There being no recognitions and presentations, we'll move on to citizens to be heard, and I have no blue cards from items not on the agenda.
That's correct.
All right, thanks, Becky. So we'll move on to old business, and we do have two items to report out from our meeting from earlier this evening. And the first is by Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move now, as I did earlier this evening, to concur in the mayor's appointment of Grace Baldino to the Youth Commission with the term ending April 30th, 2019.
Second. Motion by Trustee Scaletta, second by Trustee Sidor. And I forgot to call on Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. As this applicant is a close family member, I will have to recuse myself from the vote.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, congratulations, Grace. If you come forward here, and just to the podium. And let's make it official. And so if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, and state your full name,
I, Grace Pearl Baldino,
having been appointed to the Youth Commission
having been appointed to the Youth Commission
in the village of Arlington Heights,
in the village of Arlington Heights,
in the county of Cook,
in the county of Cook,
do solemnly swear and affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office according to the best of my ability.
of the office according to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations, Grace. We know you well. In order to make this completely official, we need to have you sign your oath with our village clerk, but also like to present you with a village logo pin, which means that you are now an official representative of this board and this community. And we will rely very heavily on you and your other Youth Commission members for advice on how to handle youth issues in the village. So congratulations again. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Let me give that to you. Thanks. We have one other motion to report out, and that's also by Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move now, as I did earlier this evening, to recommend that the Village Board of Trustees recommend to the Liquor Commissioner the issuance of a Class AA liquor license to Timios Enterprises Corp., doing business as Palm Court Restaurants and Banquets, located at 1912 North Arlington Heights Road, upon surrender of the current liquor license issued to this address.
Second.
Motion by trustee Scaletta, seconded by trustee Baldino. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations to the Palm Court and continued success. After 39 years in the village, we very much appreciate your loyalty to our community and keep up the great work. All right, thank you. We move on then to the consent agenda. Are there any board members who wish to remove an item on the consent agenda? Any members of the audience who wish to remove an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, are there any members of the board who wish to vote no or pass on any item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion to approve by trustee LaBedz, seconded by trustee Rosenberg. Any further questions or comments? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee LaBedz,
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg,
Yes.
Trustee Scaletta,
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood,
Yes.
Trustee Tinaglia,
Yes.
Trustee Sidor,
Yes.
Trustee Baldino,
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes. Well, before we move on, I just want to recognize our executive director of our Metropolis Performing Arts Center, who was here just in case an item got removed, but so he missed his normal opportunity to share with us the exciting things that are happening at the Metropolis Performing Arts Center. But thank you for coming, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to thank the board very much for your continuing support, and that we have the 4 freshmen this Saturday. There's tickets still available.
There we go. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on then to new business, and we do have one item of new business tonight. That's the South Point Shopping Center outlot. A request for subdivision and variations. Is the petitioner present? Would you come forward? Just introduce yourself if you would.
Certainly. Good evening, Mayor Hayes, members of the board. My name is Steve Bauer. I'm an attorney with Meltzer, Patel, and Stell here this evening on behalf of 600 Rand Road LLC as the applicant and owner of the subject property.
Okay, you can go ahead and proceed.
Perfect. I'm joined this evening by Adi Moore, who is the sole manager and sole member of 600 Rand Road LLC, which again is the applicant for this matter. We're very excited and pleased to be before you this evening to present what we believe is a meaningful and exciting opportunity not only for the South Point Shopping Center but also for the village as a whole to enable reuse of an existing abundant surplus parking field. As you're probably well aware, and by the way, I'll stop myself quickly here to tell you that this presentation is largely redundant of what we presented to the Plan Commission, so I'm going to attempt to pare it down in the effort of avoiding redundancy, but there are, as I'm sure you probably have all seen, a complete transcript of the testimony presented at the public hearing. As you're probably well aware, the shopping center is located at the South Point Shopping Center is located at the southeast corner of Palatine Road and Rand Road. The Floor and Decor property, which is the subject of this petition, is located in the northeasternmost portion of the site. The shopping center as a whole is approximately 30 years old, includes various uses in standalone and inline retail buildings, including Olive Garden, Chili's, Floor and Decor, and a Biff Furniture. The request before you this evening is for preliminary and final plat of subdivision approval. That is a subdivision request that pertains specifically and solely to the Floor and Decor site. As you can see from this survey of the property, the existing improvements on the site are located on the easternmost portion of the property. The central and then westernmost portions of the property are entirely parking field and, as I'll explain in further detail, surplus parking to a large extent. There's also a large landscape parking lot island that's located along the western parking line of the site in the centralmost portion and directly south of what is the proposed outlot. The proposed subdivision would create 2 new lots of record, and I apologize, I'm just now noticing that this is pretty poor quality by comparison to what was transmitted digitally. But hopefully you can tell that the majority of the site is the balance of what would be the subdivision, re-subdivision lot 1, and then the focus of the subdivision request is in the northwesternmost corner, which is proposed lot 2. That represents an approximately 1 1/4 acre outlot which is proposed to be created for future redevelopment. If and when that outlot is redeveloped, then the parking lot landscape island that I referred immediately to the south would also receive improvements in the way of a parking lot expansion that would then extend parking westerly toward that internal spine road that you can see that extends south from Palatine Road and then southeasterly toward the interior of the site. This slide represents the proposed final plat of subdivision. Again, the proposed outlot is located in the northwesternmost portion of the property, being 1.23 acres in area. The balance of the Floor and Decor site then is 7.65 acres in area for the total of approximately 9 acres, or specifically 8.88 acres in area. As you can probably tell from both this slide and the previous aerial slide, the proposed outlot is particularly well suited for future redevelopment as retail use, given not only its high visibility from Palatine Road, but also its adjacency to existing standalone retail buildings like the restaurant uses to the west and southwest, being the Olive Garden and Chili's buildings respectively. Also, as I mentioned, the internal spine road provides vehicular access through the site, and this proposed outlot is immediately adjacent to that. And then lastly, the proposed development represents a parking field that is highly underutilized in relation to the intended purpose of that field for the Floor and Decor building that's located on the far eastern portion of the property. The proposed outlot is intended to afford renewed opportunity and investment in the shopping center as a whole, and specifically for the Floor and Decor property. If you're familiar with the shopping center, I believe most any of you would agree that the shopping center is in sore need of revitalization and additional attention in the way of further investment, given not only the high vacancy rate, but also the state of repair throughout the shopping center. That's pretty significant, given that it will be next month, a total of 14 years since the village created a TIF district encompassing the shopping center, and there has not, in that 14-year duration, been any level of investment in the shopping center to the magnitude that's contemplated by the future redevelopment of this outlot. In an effort to demonstrate the viability of the future redevelopment of the outlot, the applicant presented this concept plan, which, as you can see, depicts a building footprint. That building footprint is approximately 10,200 square feet with a drive-through lane and associated escape lane, as well as some additional parking to serve the proposed new uses on that site. Again, as I referenced earlier, the parking lot landscape island that's triangular in shape and immediately to the south of the proposed outlot would also then be improved with additional parking to offset parking lost as a result of the improvement of the proposed outlot if and when developed. In recognition of the importance of parking, not only for the Floor and Decor site, but for the shopping center as a whole, we evaluated the parking supply, both existing and proposed. There are a total of 560 parking spaces that exist on the site today. If and when the proposed outlot is redeveloped in a manner consistent with the conceptual site plan, a total of 484 parking spaces would exist on lots 1 and 2 as proposed. By contrast, the village's zoning code requires only a total of 327 parking spaces, so there is a resulting surplus of 157 spaces. Importantly, the entire shopping center, inclusive of the subject property, the Floor and Decor site, is governed by a reciprocal parking agreement, which provides for parking from one portion of the shopping center onto other portions in the shopping center. There is a known deficit of 55 parking spaces on the restaurant parcels to the immediate west, again, Olive Garden and Chili's. As a result of that deficit, there is sometimes overflow parking that extends east onto the Floor and Decor property and onto the portion of the Floor and Decor site that is the proposed outlet. Even taking into account that 55 space deficit on those off-site restaurant parcels, there's still a resulting surplus of 102 spaces, again, if and when the proposed outlot is developed in a manner consistent with the concept plan. Needless to say, the subdivision request represents a significant opportunity for revitalization at the center. which I don't think can be overstated given the fact that the TIF district has not been able to catalyze that in 14 years. If approved, the contract purchaser of this proposed outlot would submit a redevelopment proposal to the village in very short order, which would include a amendment zoning request to the existing PUD that governs the entire shopping center. We're very pleased to have received the recommendation of both the Staff Development Committee as well as the unanimous recommendation of the Plan Commission. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Anything from the staff?
May I be happy to, delve in a little bit on additional parking if the board would desire?
Sure, please.
So while they're requesting a variation from providing all the information normally needed for a subdivision, this property is governed by a plan unit development, and one of the conditions is that any future development on the outlot would need to submit and receive an amendment to the PUD and review and approval by the village board. Also, the request to waive the parking requirements for a traffic and parking study. We supported that. However, 5 years ago, we did receive a parking study, consultant retained by the current property owner, and that study was really focused on parking in this area and how much parking Olive Garden and Chili's took in the area where the outlot is. So the property certainly exceeds code by just over 400 spaces. The area in question, there's currently 131 spaces in that outlot, and with the new building and the improvements, there would be 48 spaces, so that's a loss of 83 in that particular area. The remainder of the site, with expanding the parking closer to the Chili's property, picks up about 7, so there's a net loss of 76 in this particular zone. That traffic study that was done 5 years ago was done on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. In the evenings, the peak hour parking ranged from 70 to a peak of 89 in this particular outlot zone. So for the past number of years, we've been trying to identify where those parkers would park that are currently customers and employees from Olive Garden and Chili's. So we came up with a concept to expand parking in this particular area that's highlighted in yellow. While there's not a huge net gain, it does provide for better pedestrian access and also nice, clean north-south circulation and through the property and west-east into the site. So this extra parking here is very close to Chili's in particular. And then we asked the developer to incorporate a series of pedestrian access ways to make it easier and more convenient to access that parking. Also, when that study was done, we reached out to Chili's and Olive Garden and asked them what their typical evening employee count was. And we were given information by the managers of those restaurants. The Olive Garden, their typical peak evening for a Friday and Saturday night employees is 55, and Chili's is 30. So that's around 85, 86 spaces. If the employees could park off-site in Zone 3, as we've identified here, then there should be adequate parking. So, but we didn't just look at those areas, we looked at the whole center. As I mentioned earlier, there's a surplus of 407 spaces. 130 of those are in Zone 7 behind the shopping center, so even discounting those and not including those, there's still a surplus of almost 300 spaces. Looking at it by zone, you can see where some zones have a deficit. Zone 1 is Olive and Chili's restaurants. That's been that way when it was developed in 1988, and the property is covered by a shared parking agreement, so people can park across boundary lines that then most people aren't aware of where they are. This shows what the proposed parking would be, and the dashed line in front of the floor and decor area in this area illustrates 255 spaces, which is what is required by code for the floor and decor space and the laser quest and the retail strip along here. So this is the code requirement. Parking could be accommodated here. Zone 2 is under park, 48 spaces when 72 is required by code. Again, shared parking in the agreement can be accommodated here. And then for Olive Garden and Chili's, there's the excess parking in this area. So looking at not just the code, but also the demand, we kind of took that peak count from the traffic consultant a few years ago for 89 spaces for a peak demand from the Chili's and Olive Garden. We assume the new outlot, not at 48 spaces, but at 72 by code. We assume the Olive Garden was maxed out at 145 spaces, and then the code requirement for the rest of the area at 255. You can still see there would be a surplus even under that scenario of 68 spaces. So based on that, Staff Development Committee recommended and the Plan Commission concurred with a recommendation for approval, subject to these conditions, including the need to amend the PD with the traffic study for specific users to come back to the board.
All right, thank you, Mr. Perkins. Well, this certainly is a positive development for this area, and we certainly appreciate the petitioner's willingness to come forward with this proposal, and we're looking forward to this spurring development in the future, in the very near future. And so I'm certainly in favor of this. Any questions from the board? Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. I too am supportive of anything that would help improve this shopping center. The conceptual plan is non-specific, correct? There's no current anticipated business use for the outlot. Is that correct?
The short answer to your question is that is correct. The total space that's available is identified as being 10,200 square feet, so it's contemplated to be 3 demised spaces. I think conceptually, the westernmost space is anticipated to be a restaurant-type use, perhaps the same for the easternmost space. The center space would then be devoted to some sort of non-restaurant-related retail use.
Okay, so that sort of leads into where I'm going with this. It's not just conceivable, it's probable that there's going to be another restaurant in this outlot. And so the peak times for the 2 restaurants that are currently there are going to compound the issue. Do we have a feel for what the impact of having 3 or 4 restaurants is going to do to the parking situation and the traffic situation in this parking area?
So you've raised 2 things, obviously, parking and traffic. The first of which, parking, I can tell you that the parking analysis that was performed was based on some of the highest parking demanding uses, if that makes sense, which would include restaurants. And in any event, whatever is ultimately presented is something that would be subject to a PUD amendment request, which would come back before this body for further review and consideration. Relative to traffic, one of the requests for variation relates to deferral of the requirement to provide a traffic opinion. That, again, would be provided as part of the PUD amendment request.
Okay, so we're going to get a chance to see this again before any, okay.
Yes, that's correct. And we have talked to the contract purchaser. They've been talking to various tenants. I think they're envisioning some type of fast casual dining options. We've analyzed from just a parking requirement, potential of 2 small restaurants, about 2,000 square feet each, 3,000 maybe. But we don't know of any users that they've clearly identified yet. And so when they would have to come back with specific parking data for those restaurants so we could analyze it in more detail.
Okay, well, so potentially there might be drive-throughs here.
They are on this concept plan illustrating a drive-through on the west side, and we would want to see traffic data, the drive-through capacity analysis and things of that nature, and that is a special use as well for a drive-through restaurant.
Right. Well, again, I'm supportive of this initiative. That would be my only concern. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. Charles, I just want to understand a couple of things. When we talk about this outlet in Floor and Decor, are we talking about the entire South Point Shopping Center being owned by one person or one group?
No, that has been the problem with trying to get this site redeveloped for many, many years. So for the longest time, there were 3 different owners. So Inland Real Estate owned the outlots, and they owned the inline tenant space here and down in this area. And then Mr. Moore owns this piece and the parking field. And then there's another owner that owned the former Venture Kmart Biff furniture space. We've worked with all property owners over the years trying to, get it, get the property under one ownership for, a larger redevelopment. That didn't pan out. Inland, we're looking to try to exit out of the property, and about a year ago, the board approved a subdivision for these 3 outlots, and so those have been sold to different owners. The potential purchaser of this outlot has also purchased the inline tenant space here and here from inland. So there's still multiple owners. They are covered by a reciprocal easement agreement for utilities access and shared parking. There are also some use restrictions in that private agreement as well. So it is complicated. And to get to this point, we have a willing seller. And then we have a contract purchaser that doesn't want to spend the money on all the plans and studies until they know that they can develop it. So it's been this chicken and egg situation for quite a few years.
Okay. So Zone 7 is what, parking spaces behind Floor and Decor?
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody use those?
Not recently.
Okay.
I think in days past when there was Cub Foods and Kmart there, they were used by employees, but very rarely do you see anybody back there now.
Okay. And then back to the subdivision, can you show us the rendering or the plan that shows the triangle being transformed into parking? Okay. So when would this happen?
This would happen as part of any approval and construction and permit for the outlot.
Okay. And that would include lighting, parking lot lights?
Lighting, landscaping, walkways to make it more convenient and pedestrian friendly. Right now, even though there's quite a number of people parking in this outlot right now, there's really no good walkway across. People are walking through, landscaping and things like that. So trying to make a nice, clean, aesthetically pleasing pedestrian connection.
Okay. So in order to redevelop the subdivided lots, the other part of that parcel, I guess the main parcel, that would have to be upgraded as well to bring it to code and then I'm assuming that these yellow lines that are gold lines, I don't know what color to call them, for the pedestrian walkway.
Correct.
I'm assuming that's like striped in the parking lot to show that there's like a crosswalk, or what is that?
Some would be striped and some are actual sidewalks through a landscape bed. So if I can get the mouse to work here. So this sidewalk here would be in a landscape median. This area here, and here would be striped crosswalk across the main drive aisle. The same here.
Okay. And we're comfortable that, because I see that no matter what they do, that most likely people are going to have to park on the other property, and that's going to be a reciprocal agreement, correct?
Yes, that's already in place. That covers the property. And actually, the Chili's parcel itself only has about 6 or 7 spaces. That's how it was developed back in 1988. So they already rely on shared parking.
Sure. Okay. And then, of course, all of the engineering and everything with water detention would be taken care of when and if they come forward to redevelop that parcel.
Correct. If and when they come forward, they would have to submit all the preliminary engineering for stormwater detention. All those calculations would be part of the preliminary PUD, and then obviously part of the final building permit.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Thank you, Mayor. Charles, can you put up the slide that showed all of the different zones for the parking? A different one beyond that. I think this is the one here. So you have Zone 3 set up to be the parking for what is currently Floor and Decor right now, correct? So
Yes, how we looked at the parking zone 3 is the floor decor, the field of parking in the front of that.
So who is gonna use zone 7? Nobody right now?
It would depend on any uses that might go in, if Biff Furniture redeveloped, or there was a different use in this portion of the center, which we're talking to somebody right now here. They may have a little bit of potential to use that. We've talked to different retailers that might have some outdoor display that might use this parking area. So we've basically discounted that 130 spaces as part of our analysis, really, to make sure there's enough parking in the front of the center.
And does the zone 3 number of stalls cover that entire floor and decor area if it were somehow not floor and decor, and let's say it was sold and someone put in some other kind of retail use? Does it matter that it's floor and decor versus some other regular retail? Does the parking count change?
We analyzed it as if it could be a grocery store with a high parking turnover like it was years ago. The parking study that I referenced that was done a few years ago that counted 89 spaces for Olive Garden and Chili's, they only counted 68 spaces parked in those same peak times for floor and decor, but if that was a different retail use, that could be significantly higher. So with that, we've been looking at the 255, which is the minimum code requirement.
And that was where I was going with this. I mean, I've been in that parking lot enough times to know that they will never, as floor and decor, use it as it is right now to its maximum. They just don't have that many people in that store. But someday, something could change, and you have the parking allocated for that. You have the space there ready for it.
Correct. And Floor and Decor, I believe they've just extended their lease, and they're a big purchase, low customer count type of store.
Yeah.
But we've not factored that in. We've factored in a higher potential for a higher intensity use.
So I think the point I'm trying to make is you guys as staff have done a great job working with this petitioner to try and find a way to recapture something better on this site. And even though you've done all of this with zoning calculations at their maximum peak uses, because of what's there, there's still gonna be a real lot of parking spaces left over.
Correct. There's still a surplus, and we also have another opportunity to do a more in-depth review once we know the specific tenants of the proposed outlot.
So I'm a big supporter. I'd love to see this kind of stuff happen when things aren't going the way they initially intended, and here we are coming up with different solutions. So great job. Thanks.
Anybody else from the board? Anyone in the audience wish to comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve by trustee Scaletta, seconded by trustee Rosenberg. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, good luck. Hopefully we'll see something soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One other item on the agenda tonight, and that's under legal. We do have the Tobacco 21 ordinance. And so, Mr. Eckloss, do you want to make some comments? I know we've got a large group to, I think, support our efforts tonight. And so, Mr. Eckloss.
Sure. The ordinance before you tonight would change the legal age to purchase tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, from 18 to 21 in Arlington Heights. Arlington Heights would be joining 32 other Illinois communities, including 3 of our close neighboring communities, to do so. The board unanimously directed staff to draft this ordinance after some discussion at the December 10th Committee of the Whole meeting. Passage of such ordinance was recommended by the Board of Health at their June 11th meeting. The Cook County Department of Public Health, Respiratory Health Association, Illinois Public Health Association, and American Heart Association have also indicated support, as have school districts 25 and 21. The board also heard arguments from a number of Arlington Heights high school students in support of the proposed ordinance. If approved, the police department will be getting letters out to all retailers licensed to sell tobacco notifying of this change. They've already begun drafting and kind of organizing those letters. Staff recommends approval of the ordinance as drafted.
The effective date again will be what?
The effective date would be immediately. And what we'd be getting letters out and active enforcement by the police department would occur within 30 days.
Okay, thanks. Before we go to the board, I do have a couple of blue cards, and I would like to invite other comments if anyone would like to comment as well. But I do have 2 blue cards, and so Julie, and I don't want to give your last name because I would probably butcher it. So why don't you tell us what your last name is, Julie?
Give it a try.
I don't know what the 3rd letter is.
Oh, sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor Hayes and council members. My name is Julie Myristaw.
Okay.
I'm the Director of Government Relations for the American Heart Association. And really, I'm here tonight just to thank you for your persistence on this really important public health issue. I want to thank you as board members for the robust conversation that we had at the Committee of the Whole. I also want to thank staff, the Board of Health staff, and the wonderful students that were here at the last meeting. This is an extremely important public health issue. I want to thank you for your leadership, and I hope that I can continue to count on you this evening for your support, not only in passing this important ordinance, but in continuing to educate our community members and the communities around us. As was mentioned, there are more than 30 municipalities who have implemented a Tobacco 21 policy, and we're starting to see really great results. I think Arlington Heights can be the next city to set an example. I just want to thank you again for your commitment to this really important policy, and ask for your support tonight, and happy to answer any questions.
Anything from the board? Seeing none. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
And next we have the Linked Together Coalition. We've got 3 spokesmen. Who's going to be, Jory, are you going to be the primary spokesman? Okay. And just introduce yourselves if you would.
Okay. Jory, we met with the Linked Together Coalition.
Chris Zerfis with Linked Together Coalition.
Hannah Castleton, Linked Together Coalition.
So we also just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you. Linked Together is dedicated to teen drug and alcohol prevention in Arlington Heights and the surrounding communities in Wheeling Township. And we wanted to thank you for allowing us to provide the educational information, research, and facts from, again, the students that presented, Dr. Dave Brotman, who is also present with us today, and our coalition school partners who have been outstanding in letting us provide education to our students, teachers, and community members as well. Also wanted to thank the Arlington Heights Police Department for their support, and I believe that's it. I'm missing anything. And the Board of Health, of course, yes, for their support also.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are all the formal cards I have, but is there anyone else, Board of Health or Health Department, anyone who would like to address the board? We very much thank you for your involvement and your leadership in recommending this very worthwhile ordinance to the village board, and so we thank you again for your leadership and your expertise in providing us with this, I think, very worthwhile and needed recommendation. So I do want to note that we just, when we interviewed our newest youth commission member tonight, Grace Baldino, she advised us that one of the big issues at her high school is vaping amongst the teen members there, the students. And so it's very timely that we're doing this tonight. And again, I think it's the right thing to do for the health of our community. And so any other questions or comments from the board? Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone who worked so hard to bring this ordinance to our attention and to get to this point tonight. I think this is just a great step that we're taking, not just us, but also our surrounding communities. And that leads me into just a quick question I have for Mr. Recklaus. What are the closest communities that, are you sure? Do you know?
Buffalo Grove, unincorporated Lake County, Hoffman Estates, and Elk Grove have all enacted Tobacco 21 ordinances as well.
Thank you. I knew that Elk Grove was. So we are not an island in enacting
Correct.
this, and I hear that I think there's another municipality that's considering this evening in their board meeting. So thank you all. This is very important. Thanks.
Anything further from the board? Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Breckhouse, 2 questions for you. The first is in section 12-208, the prohibition of sales by self-service. So aside from the vape shop that's on Northwest Highway, is there any other business in town that this would impact on that?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
but not in terms of current businesses. Again, every business licensed to sell tobacco will be getting a letter notifying them of this change.
But when we updated that portion of the ordinance, I mean, did you guys like look at the list to just make sure that we're
In terms of the list of businesses that are
licensed to sell tobacco, correct?
That, in terms of looked at for what?
Well, okay, it says, this prohibition shall not apply to those retailers who are primarily engaged in the business of selling tobacco products, but that no person under the age of 21 permitted in such business unless they're employees. So, you know, for example, you can take like a gas station.
Right.
Obviously, it's behind the counter, right? Okay, so somebody who's under 21 would still be allowed to go in there.
Correct.
Right, okay. Is there anywhere else in town that sells tobacco that's not behind the counter that would then make it illegal to have someone who's under 21 in there? Are you following me?
Yeah. You're saying, is there any other, how many locations are there where someone is already able to be in there? I mean, because you're talking about liquor stores and so forth where there generally shouldn't be people under 21 in there, period, if I'm following you correctly.
Right, but as an example, a gas station, they need to buy gas, and they might go in there to get a soda or something like that.
Sure.
So are there any other businesses in town that this would negatively impact? That specific, it just seems very interesting that it says that they're not even allowed in there. And that's why I'm just making sure that before we make such a change, that we understand if there's going to be a negative impact to someone's business.
I'm not aware of any other businesses where there, because the key phrase is primarily engaged in the business of selling tobacco products. You know, a grocery store or a gas station or a convenience store, we wouldn't consider them being primarily in the business of selling tobacco products. It would be essentially tobacco shops or vape shops that we'd be talking about in terms of this area. I don't know if Chief Morning or Ms. Ward would be interested in clarifying that any further in terms of the intent of that section.
Yeah, literally, the only change, obviously, you can see is changing from 18 to 21. So it is, as Mr. Ricklaw said, it's only those businesses where essentially what they do is sell tobacco products. And so before this ordinance gets adopted, currently you have to be over 18 to be in those stores. Because we're changing the age to 21, they just have to, instead of being 18, you have to be 21. It's a very, and again, it's only those places where somebody can walk in and grab a product rather than having to have somebody give it to them.
Okay, so that would, you know, and I don't want to drag this out, but I mean, that would basically be like the cigar shop and the vape shop.
Correct. It would not be your grocery store. It would not be a drugstore. It would not be any of those places because those businesses are not primarily tobacco-based products. The goal of this section has always been to keep the minors out of the tobacco stores. And that's all this is still intended to do.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that we don't do something that we didn't,
Right.
Sure.
unintended consequences.
Right.
Second and last question. Why don't we have like an effective date? I mean, I guess my only thought is that, like we say, okay, if we approve it tonight, it's approved, but we're going to give like a 30-day notice.
So ordinances generally are effective 10 days after they're adopted. So the Chief Morning and I talked about this because he asked me about this last week, and what they're looking for is an opportunity to provide notice to the businesses. So while the ordinance technically becomes effective 10 days from tonight, they won't actually start working on enforcement until the date that they pick, somewhere around maybe February 1st.
It's 30 days, yeah, from today.
So the ordinance technically becomes effective. When it becomes enforced is a different question.
Right. I guess, why wouldn't we just put in a date just to have a date?
We could have, we routinely don't.
Okay. And the only reason I ask is that even though that we're not enforcing it, you know, you don't want someone who thinks that they're looking out for the best of everyone else yelling at someone who might be selling to someone who's currently 18 because it's been passed, even though the police department's not enforcing it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. As a general rule, we don't put effective dates in ordinances, any ordinances. There's exceptions that we've done in the last 30 years since I've been here. We can add an effective date.
Sure.
I don't know, you'd have to decide what you wanted that effective date to be. That's
I
up
would
to
just
you.
feel a little bit more comfortable with an effective date, just so that everyone's on the same page, and that you don't have, even though the police department's not going out and enforcing it yet, that you don't have, other residents or shoppers or anybody else chastising someone who's employed there who might not even be aware of it yet.
What would be a reasonable time for an
I
effective
would
date?
recommend February 1st, because it's easy, to be honest.
And I think I don't know if, Chief, are we talking about 30 days from today as the enforcement date? So we could say February 7th if we wanted to make it clean, because that's essentially when we're planning on beginning our enforcement.
I would make a motion to include a date, but I'd rather hear from my colleagues first.
All right. Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. So in here, it says that it shall be effective from and after its passage, and it says on here, passed and approved January 7th. So, that's today's date. So, that, in my mind, that's sufficient, I think, to use that date today of the fact that we're adopting it today. The fact that it's not going to be subject to any enforcement for 30 days, I think, what Trustee Scaletta says is, in my mind, it's today, and the fact that it's not enforced, it's still effective today. That's my opinion on this. So.
It's a legal quagmire we're in right now, Mayor.
Yeah. So, that's my thought. The other question I had too was, do we really have a thorough list of who sells tobacco products,
Yes.
even though they're not a tobacco shop per se?
You have to be licensed to sell tobacco.
Okay. So any kind of tobacco products per se, even though it's not cigarettes or cigars or?
Yes, because in our code, we include all sorts of electronic and alternative nicotine products as
So we
tobacco
have a
products.
comprehensive list?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I just want to add, I want to thank the Board of Health and Health staff and Police Department for all their work to get this passed. Thank you.
Anything further? Trustee Tinaglia.
I'm comfortable with it as you've got it written. The fact that it's effective immediately, as Trustee Rosenberg said. Whether we choose, whether our police department chooses to start handing out fines tomorrow or 30 days from tomorrow is entirely up to other people. So for me up here on this board, it's effective tomorrow morning.
And I'm comfortable with that as well. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion to approve the ordinance as written by Trustee Tinaglia, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Any further questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Baldino.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
Trustee LaBedz.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
Trustee Scaletta.
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes. Well, again, thank you all for your involvement in this very worthwhile effort. Thank you. All right, we have no other legal items. Report of the village manager, Mr. Reckloff.
Nothing further?
Right. And I am almost a little afraid to ask, but are there any members of the board who have any petitions or communications? Being none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Tinaglia, seconded by Trustee Baldino. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for joining us this evening.